The ancient world often buzzed with a persistent question. Were the Macedonians truly Greek? This was not a simple matter with a straightforward answer. Macedonians resided to the north of the main Greek city-states, a region somewhat on the periphery of the core Hellenic world. Their customs and political structures often appeared different to those living in Athens, Sparta, or Thebes. This geographical and cultural separation laid the groundwork for a complex and often contentious relationship. The debate over their Hellenic identity would echo for centuries, influencing politics and historical narratives. It was a matter of pride, politics, and perception for both sides. Many Greeks in the classical period viewed the Macedonians with a degree of suspicion. They were often labeled as barbarians, a term Greeks used for non-Greek speakers or those perceived as less civilized. This was not always a statement about savagery, but rather about being outside the shared Hellenic cultural sphere. The Macedonians had a monarchical system which contrasted sharply with the democratic or oligarchic systems prevalent in many prominent Greek polis. This fundamental difference in governance further fueled the perception of them as outsiders, distinct from the self-governing city-states to their south. These political differences were significant. The interactions between Macedonians and Greeks were varied. There was trade and sometimes alliances, but also frequent conflict. The Macedonians themselves, especially their royal house, the Argeiads, claimed descent from Greek heroes, specifically from Argos in the Peloponnese. They actively sought to participate in Greek cultural events, such as the Olympic Games, though their inclusion was sometimes contested. This ambition to be recognized as Greek highlights the importance of Hellenic identity in the ancient world. It was a status that carried considerable prestige and legitimacy, something the Macedonian rulers clearly desired for themselves and their kingdom. Therefore, the question of Macedonian Greekness was deeply intertwined with broader cultural and political currents. It wasn't just about ancestry or language in isolation. It was about how these elements were perceived and interpreted by contemporary Greeks and Macedonians alike. The rise of Macedon as a major power would only intensify this debate, forcing the Greek world to confront the nature of its own identity and the shifting dynamics of power in the Aegean region. The stage was set for a dramatic re-evaluation of who was considered Greek and why. To be considered Greek in antiquity meant embracing Hellenism. This was a broad concept. It encompassed a shared language, or at least mutually intelligible dialects. It also involved common religious beliefs and practices, honoring the same pantheon of Olympian gods. Participation in shared cultural institutions, like the Pan-Hellenic Games held at Olympia, Delphi, Nemea, and Isthmia, was a crucial marker. These events were exclusive to Greeks and fostered a sense of collective identity. They were opportunities for Greeks from various city-states to come together, compete, and celebrate their common heritage. This shared cultural fabric was vital. Macedonians, however, presented a more ambiguous picture regarding these markers of Hellenism. While their elite increasingly adopted Greek language and customs, particularly from the 5th century BCE onwards, the general populace retained many distinct local traditions. Their religious practices, while incorporating Greek deities, also included local Thracian and Illyrian influences. This syncretism, or blending of beliefs, could make them appear different to Greeks from more established cultural centers. The degree of Hellenization varied across different parts of Macedon and among different social classes, making a uniform assessment difficult for their southern neighbors who valued cultural purity. The Macedonian ruling class, the Argead dynasty, made significant efforts to present themselves as thoroughly Greek. They patronized Greek artists and poets, invited Greek scholars to their court, and emphasized their mythical Greek lineage. King Archelaus I, for example, moved the capital to Pella and established games there in honor of Zeus, modeled on the Olympic Games. This was a clear attempt to align Macedon with mainstream Greek culture, yet, for many Greeks, these efforts were viewed with skepticism, seen perhaps as an affectation by an ambitious semi-barbarian monarchy rather than genuine Hellenism from the core of their society. Thus, cultural identity was a key battleground in the debate. While the Macedonian elite might speak Greek fluently and appreciate Greek literature, the broader Macedonian society, with its unique dialect, distinct military traditions, and different social structures, often fell short of the idealized Hellenic standard for many Greeks. The very definition of Greekness was, in a sense, policed by the established Greek city-states, who often saw Macedonians as culturally and ethnically distinct, regardless of the aspirations of their kings. This perception played a significant role in their interactions. The political landscape of the Greek world was dramatically altered by the rise of Macedon, particularly under King Philip II. Before Philip, Macedon was often seen as a fractious kingdom on the northern frontier, a useful buffer state perhaps, but not a central player. Philip changed all of that. He was a brilliant military strategist and a cunning diplomat. He reformed the Macedonian army, creating the formidable Macedonian phalanx. He unified the often warring Macedonian tribes under his strong central rule. This consolidation of power within Macedon was the first step towards its dominance. Philip then turned his attention southwards towards the divided Greek city-states. He skillfully exploited their rivalries, using a combination of diplomacy, bribery, and military force to extend Macedonian influence. Many Greeks, most notably the Athenian orator Demosthenes, viewed Philip with alarm. Demosthenes delivered fiery speeches known as Philippics, warning his fellow Athenians of the threat Philip posed to Greek liberty and autonomy. He portrayed Philip and the Macedonians as aggressive outsiders, not true Greeks, who aimed to subjugate the Hellenic world. This political opposition heavily colored the perception of Macedonian identity. The culmination of Philip's ambitions was the Battle of Chaeronea in 338 BCE, where his forces decisively defeated a coalition of Greek states. This victory effectively ended the era of independent Greek city-states and established Macedonian hegemony over Greece. Philip then formed the League of Corinth, a federation of Greek states under his leadership, ostensibly to wage war against the Persian Empire. While this presented a veneer of Greek unity, it was clear that Macedon was the dominant power. This political subjugation further complicated how Greeks viewed the Macedonians, now not just as culturally distinct but as their overlords. Alexander the Great, Philip's son, inherited this powerful kingdom and the planned invasion of Persia. His subsequent conquests created an enormous empire stretching from Greece to India. Alexander actively promoted Greek culture and language throughout his new empire, a process known as Hellenization. Paradoxically, while he spread Hellenism far and wide, his own Macedonian origins and the dominance of his Macedonian troops continued to fuel the debate about whether Macedonians were truly Greek or a separate people who had adopted and then imposed Greek culture through conquest. Their immense power undeniably shaped these perceptions, making them both admired and resented. Linguistic differences also played a crucial role in how Macedonians were perceived by other Greeks. While the Macedonian language was related to Greek, and some scholars today consider it a distinct northwestern Greek dialect, it was different enough to be noticeable. Ancient sources are somewhat ambiguous on this point. Some suggest Macedonians and Greeks could understand each other, while others imply the need for interpreters, at least for the common Macedonian soldier interacting with southern Greeks. This linguistic variance contributed to the sense of otherness, as language was a fundamental component of Hellenic identity. The historian and geographer Strabo, writing centuries later during the Roman period, provided valuable insights into these distinctions. Strabo, himself a Greek from Pontus, acknowledged the Hellenization of the Macedonian elite and their claims of Greek ancestry. However, he also noted that parts of Macedon were inhabited by tribes that many Greeks considered barbarian, such as some Thracian and Illyrian groups who had become part of the Macedonian kingdom. He discussed the varying degrees of Greekness across different regions of Macedon, suggesting it was not a monolithic entity in terms of cultural assimilation. Strabo's writings reflect the complexity of the issue. He often categorized Macedonians separately from Greeks in his geographical descriptions, even while discussing their shared history and the spread of Hellenism under Alexander. For instance, he would list Epirus, then Macedon, then Thessaly, and the rest of Greece, implying a geographical and, to some extent, an ethnic distinction. His perspective, though later, drew upon earlier sources and prevailing views, indicating that the perception of Macedonians as distinct, or at least not unequivocally Greek, persisted long after their political zenith. This careful separation in texts was significant. Ultimately, the combination of a distinct dialect or language, unique local customs, a different political system, monarchy versus polis, and the historical memory of Macedonian conquest contributed to the enduring view of Macedonians as separate from the core Greek world. Even as the Macedonian kings championed Hellenic culture and their empire spread it across Asia, the subtle and not-so-subtle differences noted by observers like Strabo maintained a distinction in the minds of many. The rise of Macedon did not fully erase these lines. In some ways, by imposing its rule, it may have even sharpened them for those who valued their prior independence.